In 1981, a bullet narrowly missed the heart of a sitting president. Who was the man who pulled the trigger? Here's how history remembers John Hinckley Jr., the obsessive man who nearly killed Ronald Reagan. The policies of President Ronald Reagan helped define the 1980s, but his first term was very nearly cut short. He had been in office less than 100 days when on March 30th, 1981, John Hinckley Jr. walked up to him outside the Washington Hilton Hotel and shot him and 3 other people. Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, police officer Thomas Delahanty, and White House Press Secretary James Brady were wounded, along with the president. Brady suffered severe permanent injuries after being shot in the face. When Brady died in 2014, Virginia medical examiners ruled his death a homicide, as it was the result of the injuries he had sustained in the 1981 attack. The would-be assassin was immediately restrained, and the president was rushed to a hospital. It was later reported that Reagan had suffered a collapsed lung, and the bullet had missed his heart by the narrowest of margins. The day after his surgery, he was signing documents, and on April 11th, he returned to the White House. Then the nation watched as a bizarre story unfolded around Hinckley's trial. Who exactly was he, and how did he decide to assassinate Reagan? One might expect that the childhood of a man who shot an American president was terrible, but the New York Times reported that John Hinckley Jr.'s childhood was precisely the opposite. Hinckley's father, John W. Hinckley, was the president chairman of the Vanderbilt Energy Company, an oil and gas corporation that brought in revenues of around $4 million a year, or approximately $12 million a year in today's money. It's perhaps unsurprising, then, that John Jr. grew up in an upper-class Dallas neighborhood, attended one of the most elite schools there, and went on to enroll at Texas Tech. His father was a longtime conservative Republican and a supporter of Reagan. John Jr.'s older brother Scott was friends with Vice President George H.W. Bush's son Neil. Their father volunteered for a Christian relief group, and both parents were regular churchgoers. John Jr. had innate talents for playing the guitar. In Time's examination of John Hinckley Jr.'s years at college, his professor of German history said Hinckley was a quiet student, but among the topics he chose to write about in his papers were Hitler's Mein Kampf and Auschwitz. According to the New York Times, it was believed that Hinckley got serious about building Nazi connections in the months between dropping out of Texas Tech and reappearing at his parents' home. Michael C. Allen, the head of the Nazi Party of America at the time, said that at a 1978 parade march in St. Louis, Hinckley was dressed in full regalia as a Nazi stormtrooper. Still, details of Hinckley's involvement in the party are sketchy and sometimes contradictory. The Texas Tech campus newspaper published a letter written by Hinckley in 1978, confirming that while he believed Nazis should be accorded freedom of speech, quote, no sensible person believes in the National Socialist Creed. In 1979, the party declined to renew Hinckley's membership. Allen explained to the New York Times, he kept talking about going out and shooting people and blowing things up. When a guy comes to us advocating that, we make the assumption that he is either a nut or a federal agent trying to entrap us. Either way, we don't want them. The movie Taxi Driver was released in 1976 during John Hinckley Jr.'s stint in the seedy side of LA, Time noted. As he drifted in California, he became obsessed, watching the film more than a dozen times. But Hinckley was far from alone in his fixation on Taxi Driver. LA Mag spoke with screenwriter Paul Schrader during an episode of the podcast The Originals, and Schrader talked about a group he called the Taxi Driver Kids. They were fans who became fascinated by Robert De Niro's character Travis Bickle. Schrader recalled an incident where one man, believing that the film was based on him, demanded to know how Schrader knew who he was. He wasn't the only one to reach out. Schrader said that after hearing about the failed assassination attempt, he recognized the name. Hinckley had contacted him as well. He wrote letters saying he wanted to be introduced to Jodie Foster, who was then 12 and co-starred in the film.
Didn't you ever hear of women's lib?
Schrader said that he had confirmed that his secretary had thrown the letters away and swore her to secrecy. He also lied to federal investigators by saying he'd never had contact with Hinckley. Jurors at John Hinckley Jr.'s trial watched Taxi Driver. At the heart of Hinckley's motivations for trying to kill the president was his unrequited obsession with Foster. In 1982, the New York Times published a letter that Hinckley wrote in response to the paper's inquiries. He wrote that he saw the assassination attempt as giving his life meaning, and nothing that happened afterward would take that away, adding, I sacrificed myself and committed the ultimate crime in hopes of winning the heart of a girl. Yes, Jodie Foster knows who I am, just like the entire civilized world knows who I am. But does it matter now? I wanted Jodie's love, not eternal infamy. In a way, he feels he got what he wanted. He would always be tied to Foster in the historical record and in her mind.
How many Hinkleys do you know?
As months went by, John Hinckley Jr.'s letters to Jodie Foster went unanswered, and his attempts to contact her while she studied at Yale failed.
So you just don't ever want to get tired?
No.
He started down the path of thinking that only a massive gesture would get her attention. At first, his plan in that regard wasn't the killing of President Ronald Reagan. It was to go after his predecessor, Jimmy Carter. According to Hunting the President, Hinckley started stalking Carter in September 1980. The then president was on the campaign trail, and Hinckley, following the president's campaign route published in newspapers, first headed to a stop in Dayton, Ohio. He considered it a trial run, and when he easily got within arm's reach of Carter, he decided that his scheme was viable. After Ohio, Hinckley followed Carter to Nashville, where he first backed out of pursuing the assassination attempt, and was then arrested for carrying guns on a plane. Hinckley later admitted that one of Carter's guards had made eye contact with him, and he hadn't been able to go through with it. Beyond that, when it began to seem Carter was going to lose the election, Hinckley decided that assassinating a failed candidate wouldn't be a glorious enough move for him. Though he was identified alongside Carter and was carrying firearms, the Secret Service was never alerted. After John Hinckley Jr.'s attempt to kill the president, law enforcement officials attempted to reconstruct the events leading up to it. They included an arrest on October 9, 1980. Hinckley had been traveling from Nashville to New York when airport security discovered 3 guns and some ammunition in his carry-on. He was arrested, the guns were confiscated, and he was released after paying a $50 fine. 4 days later, at a Dallas pawn shop barely a mile from where John F. Kennedy was assassinated, he purchased the pistol that he used to shoot Reagan. Hinckley's mother, Joanne, testified that the family had been working with a psychiatrist to determine the best way to get Hinckley on a path to becoming a financially and socially independent adult. She explained that the mental health professional had told them to give him $100, drop him at the Denver airport, and drive away. So that's what she did. The next word they received about their son was the news that he had tried to kill the president.
And shots were fired, apparently at President Reagan, as he was coming out of the Washington Hilton Hotel this afternoon.
Just days after President Ronald Reagan returned to the White House in 1981, the public read Time's blow-by-blow account of the assassination attempt. There were no doubts about whether John Hinckley Jr. had pulled the trigger, so when he went to trial, guilt wasn't being argued, but culpability was. Hinckley was facing 2 outcomes: jail time or confinement to a psychiatric facility. His fate would depend on whether a jury thought he could be held accountable for his actions. The prosecution argued that he was completely responsible, while the defense contended that his psychiatric diagnosis, which included schizophrenia and depression, meant that he couldn't be found guilty. Ultimately, the jury sided with the defense. Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Instead of a jail sentence, he was sent to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, a Washington, D.C. psychiatric facility. He would remain there for the duration of his 35-year confinement. What happened to Hinckley in the following decades was surprising to many. By the 1990s, Hinckley had quite a bit of freedom. He held down a clerical job, could move freely around the hospital grounds, and even had a long-term girlfriend. He also had an unlikely pen pal. He frequently exchanged letters with Ted Bundy before the serial killer's 1989 execution. In 1999, Hinckley was allowed to leave the hospital for short supervised visits with family. Although he had a small setback in 2000, he was given more and more freedom. Hinckley gave scores of interviews during his time there, often drawing attention to the fact that he didn't see himself as just a shooter. When Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords was shot in 2011, he was reportedly horrified. He said at the time, "Wow, is that how people see me? I'm an artist, I'm a musician. Nobody knows that. They just see me as a guy who tried to kill Reagan." John Hinckley Jr.'s life changed bit by bit. In 2016, he was given a conditional release from St. Elizabeth's. According to the Associated Press, Hinckley was permitted to move in with his mother in Williamsburg, Virginia, full-time in September that year. Hinckley's freedom came with conditions, but 2 years later, he was given another freedom. He was now allowed to post and publish his music and artwork under his own name.
Hello, everybody. This is an original song I wrote not long ago.
Hinckley has found a serious fan for his work, Max Collins of the band Eve 6. Collins interviewed Hinckley, and they spoke about the past, present, and future. Hinckley said that he was getting to a better place and was happy, but he added, "I did 35 years in a mental hospital, and let me tell you, that'll take a lot out of you to be an inpatient in a mental hospital for 35 years. It takes a lot out of you spiritually, physically, emotionally. So if you're hearing a tinge of sadness in the songs, it's probably from that." In 2022, all the restrictions attached to Hinckley's freedom were lifted, and shortly after the announcement, he sat down for media interviews. Hinckley spoke candidly not only about his time at St. Elizabeth's, including his 2 suicide attempts, and said that he had changed.
I'm glad I did not succeed.
You are.
Oh, yes.
Still, court-appointed freedom doesn't guarantee a wide social acceptance. While Hinckley said he hopes to make a living with his music, 4 venues that had booked him quickly canceled his shows after receiving threats. John Hinckley Jr. is up to something else these days. On November 9th, 2022, he announced on Twitter that he was going to be starting his own political party called the National Redemption Party. He wrote, We are for peace, love, racial equality, LGBTQ rights, abortion rights, the Green New Deal. We oppose the mob that controls the music industry. Yahoo suggested the part about the music industry revealed the truth of why Hinckley might be taking a run at politics. Just what his new political party means to do wasn't immediately clear.